Hi everyone, hope you're well, hope you've had a good weekend. Here is provocation number 6, spatial theory and social justice. So the learning outcomes are, after this video, you will be able to explain what we mean by space and spatial theory, how spatial theory relates to social justice, how spatial theory relates to English teaching. Okay, so two major influences on this topic, which I'm so passionate about, as many of you know. First of all, when I worked at a school back in 2013-14, the head teacher was very innovative and she wanted to change things. She wanted to get rid of classrooms. She wanted big open spaces. She wanted everyone to experiment, and she invited Professor Stephen Heppel along, who is the major academic on children's learning spaces, and it really was mind-blowing to me. It was just so interesting. Moving forward to 2019, when I was doing my MA in Birkbeck, one of the lectures was on, as you can see, on Egyptian literature based in Cairo. But what really interested me was how she matched it with urban spatial theory. And so I just suddenly realised this is what interests me: cities, education, geography, social justice. And it all came together, especially in these 3 books. So when we talk about space, we don't mean the universe in geography. We mean the spaces that we move in. It could be your kitchen, it could be your workplace, but the way you move through these places is the space that we occupy, not the universe, although it's not unconnected. So the way we look at this is there's 2 ways of looking at space, spatial theory. There's absolute space and relative space. Now, absolute space was developed by Isaac Newton, and it's the kind of what we understand the world to be, 3-dimensional. If we went up in a lift, we'd go up on the y-axis. If we went on the z, if we walked forward, we'd be on the z-axis, and if we walked sideways, we'd be on the x-axis. And it's how we exist in the world. So this is an example. Okay, so I'm moving down the stairwell of the college. So I'm going down on the y-axis. All right. On this little bit here, I'm back on the z-axis, y-axis, z-axis again, y-axis. And finally, when I get to the ground floor, I'm on the z-axis again. Okay, so that's me moving through space. Relative space is different and a bit more difficult to explain. It's how you relate. I only know where I am in relation to where, if I met one of you, where you are. Think of the moon and the earth. We only know where the moon is in relation to the earth. If anyone has a better explanation, I'd love to hear it. Right, but there is one other kind of space, and that's social space. All our human spaces are social spaces, right? That could be classrooms, mosques, churches, pubs, libraries, parks, squares. Anywhere where people join together is a social space. So how does this relate to spatial theory, spatial justice? Right, well, as a few weeks ago we looked at this poem, didn't we, by Giovanni Rose. And that key line that I just think is so important: we fight over streets we don't own. The 3rd line down. Okay, that's social justice, because we don't get to choose to buy, most of us anyway these days. We can't buy our own houses. We don't own the streets we live on. And if he hasn't read it, he should do, because that's exactly what this young man means when he talks about fighting over streets we don't own. All right, space, the space we move through on the planet is not neutral. Every building is owned by someone. So here are some examples of spatial justice. The really obvious one is the cost of housing in London. All right, there is a clear injustice here where poor people are squeezed into small 1-2 bedroom flats, where very wealthy people have mansions in Mayfair and Park Lane. Low traffic neighbourhoods. This is a contested one, but some people argue that these low traffic neighbourhoods direct traffic away from posh middle class areas into working class areas, therefore making the traffic and the pollution worse for those areas. Grenfell is a classic example of spatial justice, right? The building, one of the main reasons why it burnt down was that the things that were attached to the side of the building were very low quality, and that was one of the reasons that it caught fire. You can bet your bottom dollar that expensive high-rise houses for millionaires will not have that kind of a covering. Public transport is another example of where spatial justice is a clear relative thing for us. It's more obvious in the USA, but still has some relevance for UK in the sense that if you ask this question, who do you see on buses? It's not posh people, is it? It's not middle class people. It's basically working class people and people of colour and migrants. Okay, spatial justice. Gated communities is another example, and COVID is a really obvious one. During lockdown, it was far easier for people who had bigger houses and gardens to deal with lockdown than those that were cramped into small flats. Some examples in education. Schools and colleges in poor areas have less space. They have less green space, less facilities, bigger classes, and are less likely to have a library. Okay. So moving on to spatial theory in English. The really, really obvious example is in the GCSE exam, question 5, paper 1, when you have those two options. You can either write a story or describe a scene. And as you can see, almost always the photograph is of a place or a space. And so the exam board are asking you to be creative in describing this space, right? I don't know why that wasn't working. Okay, so it's not just in English or education, science and maths. There are links with video games, for example, with the interaction with the virtual space. There are links with film, the created story world, which is called mise en scène. There are links with sociology and politics through social justice and psychology, ESD, and business is a very obvious one. Think of health and safety rules. Health and safety rules are there to minimise risk in spaces, essentially. And shops and restaurants are designed to be inviting. Right, to summarise, you should be able to explain what we mean by space and spatial theory, how spatial theory relates to social justice, and how spatial theory relates to English GCSE English teaching. Wish I could say more, but I've got to keep it short. So, final provocation. Be aware of your surroundings. Where are you allowed to go and where aren't you allowed to go? This has a meaning in spatial theory. It's called the right to the city. And it's again, it was devised by Henry Lefebvre. So right now, you and I, we are slowly being squeezed out of the city by high prices and political policies. And it's time this changed. See you next week.